We're going to be doing one thing and one thing only.
Building tanks.
Welcome back to the second part of this World War II Gunpla Diorama video series. So in the first video we built this, which was the actual Gunpla kit bash part. In the second video here today we'll be building the actual diorama as well as some other goodies. So let's get right into it. So the other portion of this project was going to be a Tamiya Easy 8 M4 Sherman tank. It did see action in World War II despite it showing as a Korean War tank. It did have a lot of sprues. It was very akin to something to, I would say, a master grade for Gunpla. This is it without a lot of the actual, custom bits that would really show off a lot of the details. So it's pretty bare bones in this pretty state, but I wanted to get a fairly good grasp for the scale and size of it. We can see here beside the Gunpla already that unfortunately it is quite large. So I did have a lot of scaling issues in this project that I did not foresee because I was not being very careful in regards to the tank. I should have been, but I wasn't. So we'll get into that a bit more later in the video and how I kind of worked around that. But for now, this is the tank as it is. I did paint it up right away to match the actual Gunpla in that base green color. So I took off the treads for now just to make the whole tank easier to handle. And I knew there was going to be a bunch of different things that I had to paint around the tank, so I got myself set up as if I was going to be painting a Mini, which I do a lot of in my spare time, not really on the channel. So the first things up was a lot of the gunmetal details. For this I used Leadbelcher from Citadel Paints, which is a pretty good gunmetal substitute, to get all of the wheels, a lot of the finer details, as well as the weapons on the gun except for the main tank gun. I do have some experience painting tanks in regards to Warhammer, but nothing really quite this big or I should say grounded in reality. So all these finer details were actually pretty fun to paint, but nothing I'm not too used to. For the headlamps, I did a similar recipe to what I did for the lenses on the shoulder of the actual Gunpla. Then the back, I painted up the actual gas canisters and the ammo crates. Then I painted up the cover of the main tank gun on the actual turret. So the next big thing I did was a wash on all of the gunmetal bits. So if you don't know, a wash is a pretty thin acrylic based liquid that seeps into the creaks and the crevices of all these different bits to really bring out the finer details. So you kind of just take it and spread it all over, make sure it doesn't pool too much in one area, but you are pretty much good to go from there. So here's an unwashed side compared to a washed side. And goddamn does that look wonderful in comparison. So I added some tally marks on the actual turret of the tank to match the shield of the Gunpla to signify tank kills. I also add some flavor to the tank gun itself, in this case the word kill. I also needed to do some weathering at this point, so I used my tried and true method for tanks, and that was to grab a bit of sponge, as well as a pair of tweezers, to grab that pair of sponge, dip it in some gunmetal or some silver paint, and you kind of just dab it onto the corners and edges that I've done here that you can see on the tank. What this does is create kind of like a natural chipping effect on the paint of those raised corners and surfaces, as well as just create some natural weathering. You can also dab it on the front or the side plates on flat areas, and that can create some natural dots of weathering, which is really nice. So we can see the tank here mostly done up beside the Gunpla. Again, the scaling is a big issue. I am very, very aware of that. Up next was the camo netting that I used similarly on my actual Gunpla. I put this around the main tank turret, a little bit on the back and a little bit on the front. I didn't want it to overshadow the entire model itself, so I didn't cover it too much or anything like that. Here's the other side of the tank in case you wanted to see that. I didn't want to go overboard with the decals on this. This is not a Gunpla, so it's not going to have one on every little corner. Here's the back showing the details of the actual gas canisters and the ammo crates, as well as a couple of decals again. So the next portion was the actual diorama itself. I headed down to Michael's and I got myself a bunch of stuff, which included a big old bag of moss for very cheap, which is very nice. A big base. I'm not sure what you would call it. It's styrofoam for sure, but it was an actual nightmare to work with, but I'll get into that in a little bit. As well as I bought a fake house plant. On this fake house plant, you could actually pull these off of the branches. They're little detachable things, and they kind of worked out to be perfect trees, and more perfect than I initially thought, but we'll get into that in a bit. I did buy some fine grained sand in case I needed it. I didn't end up needing it, so that's a bust. So I'm getting a feel for the actual layout of the diorama here. I know that the trees are going to be quite a bit too short for the tank itself. I do attempt some stacking later in the video. You'll see that in a little bit. But again, just seeing how it's going to kind of work on this board. The Gunpla is quite a bit smaller. I did have some hobby wire hanging around. This worked out well in my favor because all I had to do was cut out 2 small portions and stick them right into the trees themselves because the trees had holes due to them being detachable. Because of that, I could stick it right into the styrofoam board and I had no issues whatsoever. So here's all the trees put in place, as well as some of them stacked so that they're quite a bit taller than the tank now. It does sell that quite a bit more, however, it does not change the fact that the Gunpla still is quite small. I did use a lot of that moss to create grass for my diorama. I put that on either side of the tank and the Gunpla itself. To do that, I simply took a lot of that moss that I purchased, put it in a Tupperware container, and just chopped the shit out of it with a pair of scissors. So it was finally cut up and turned into grass. Next, I filled in that actual path with sand. This is just normal sand that I got off the street and then baked in the oven to get rid of any impurities and all that good stuff. Filled that in, but I do still plan to brown that up, muddy it up, get it nice and dirty so that there is some realism on this actual diorama. So I had some barrels left over from the Dark Souls board game, and I thought they'd be good to add some visual interest to the right side of the diorama, which is pretty barren at this point. As we can see here, however, the scale is pretty off. They are pretty big compared to like the trees and even the tank itself, to be honest. So I addressed that in the future. However, for the time being, I do paint them up just a little bit, nothing too crazy or fancy. At the same time, I also dirty up and muddy up the dirt road without doing any of the spots where the tank or the Gunpla sit. You'll notice that this video is not quite done yet. I would ask that you please stick around after this showcase for a little something special. So it was at this point in the project where I realized something pretty major, and that's that I didn't really like the diorama that came out. Of course, the big thing is that the tank is too big. I mentioned it a few times in this video already. But alongside that, the barrels are also too big, and I did not take any time painting them. And overall, it just looked very amateurish, and I wasn't happy with that. So I did something I don't normally do, and I decided to continue working on it. The big thing I had to do, though, of course, was let go of the tank. There's no way in which I could make that work realistically and make it look good, so I let it go. The first step to rectifying this diorama was filling in those gaps where the tank and the Gunpla previously sat, so that's what I did. As well, I got rid of the extensions on the trees, because the shorter the trees are, the more it's going to actually sell the scale of the Gunpla. I had an extra rifle from the Gaku, I don't even remember what it's called anymore, a previous video that I did, and I thought it'd be an excellent replacement for the barrels, which are also off scale. So I took the rifle, I cut it in half at the barrel to sell that destructed look. I also had an extra hand that I was going to use to put it near the rifle as well. To further sell the destructed look of the rifle and the hand, I dry brushed some basic silver paint onto them, as well as using some Vallejo pigment FX, specifically this kind, which is for rusted effects or dry earth or humid earth and stuff like that. And again, this is just a basic dry brush, nothing too fancy. The rifle is here on the right side of the diorama, kind of around where the barrels used to be, along with the hand. While the glue is still wet, I also sprinkled some more grass on it, so it kind of looks like it was buried a little bit. The hand, I had a couple of copper wires where I glued them to the outside sockets, so it kind of looks like a destructed hand. And I put some more mud around the general area to further sell that kind of down and dirty look. I put more mud and evened out the entire road so that the tone matched consistently throughout it. And I had an extra tree that I put onto the right side so I can add some more visual depth to the actual diorama. If you're curious, the mud effect that I'm using is AK Crackle Wet Effects. Typically, if you put it on thick enough, it would make an actual cracking. But in my case, I'm putting it on thin enough so that it actually just comes off looking like mud, especially if you just put it on top of sand. But that's all the other steps I had to take here to rectify my diorama as we go into the actual showcase. So thanks for sticking around to the end of the video, if you're still here, of course. I'm very happy that I decided to go back to this project and kind of completely change it. I really did love the tank and how it came out, but unfortunately it was just simply too big. It's my own fault for really not, looking at that ahead of time when I went and bought the kit. It was kind of a spur of the moment decision, if I'm being honest. So the best thing I could do was just take that away and retune it, and I think it came out looking a lot better because of it. So I put the tank by itself on the shelf, and that's where it will live for now, knowing that it will always match my Gunpla, but now the Gunpla will be by itself on the diorama, sitting beside all the other mono-eye militant looking suits that I'd made in the past. Then of course up top I have the rest of my custom ones, which are a bit more on the, kind of super robot side of things. But again, thanks again for sticking around to the end, guys. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a good one.